the channel, we're going to be demoing an amp I've been waiting a very long time for, the Paul Reed Smith Mark Tremonti signature head, the MT100. This amp is a pretty special amp for a variety of reasons. The first being that it's essentially like 3 amps in one. I know that many amps have multiple channels, but they also share the same preamps and the same power amp tubes. This amp actually has 8 12AX7 tubes in it and 4 6L6GC tubes in it. Essentially, it cuts into 3 different amps the way that it's built, which is, again, very unique. The only other amp that I know of personally like this is the Hughes and Kettner Tri-Amp. So based on what we were talking about there are 3 different channels, which are essentially 3 different amps. The first is a clean channel. The second is a more classically gained overdrive pedal based on, from what I understand, some of Mark's favorite Dumble amps. And the third channel is a fire-breathing high gain channel. And that's what you heard in the intro to this demo. When I say that it's a fire-breathing high gain channel, I mean it. Based on my settings that we'll go through in a minute, I am probably on 3 gain-wise for that high gain channel. And you could hear in the demo how much gain this amp puts out. So before we go into the individual demo sounds of each channel, let me run through for you what my signal path is, as well as my settings. So on channel 1, I have the presence roughly about 5 on here, the master volume also around 5, the bass at around 6, middle around 6, and the treble around 7. The volume of that channel, I probably have around 7 to 8. So in my settings that I'm describing go based on amp knob settings from a 1 to 10 setting, not based on analog clock settings. On the second overdrive channel, I have the presence roughly around 4 or 5, the master around 4 or 5, bass at 6, middle at 6, treble at about 6 as well, and the gain I have at about 4 or 5. On the third or high gain lead channel, I have the presence also between 5 and 6, the master roughly around 4, the bass at 6, middle at 6, treble at 6, and as mentioned, the gain is roughly about 3. This amp has an incredible amount of gain. So for the user that's getting into this, if you're looking for that high gain application, which I think most of the target demographic looking for this amp is, this amp can definitely do that with some pretty stellar cleans as well. Some other features that I really love about this amp are, one, it has outside bias ports. So for anyone that is unfamiliar with amp biasing, basically what that is that when a tube goes out, which eventually tubes fail, you have to have them rebiased in order for the amp to work correctly. Typically that is a process where you have to take the amp apart, and it's very unsafe for the novice person coming into it, or really, I mean, unless you're an electrician or a qualified amp tech, it's a very dangerous practice unless you want to take some self-risk. I mean, there are some YouTube channels out there, some great resources to teach you how to do it, but it can be a very deadly situation if you do that incorrectly, because you have to remove the chassis from the amp and bias the amp with the full circuit board electronics exposed. With this amp, the bias ports for you to do that are all on the outside in the back of the amplifier, much like Diesel does with their amps. So for somebody that needs to do a tube swap, the manual tells you the bias settings you should be at. You can basically put in your tools into the bias ports, bias it with a multimeter that way, and it's completely safe to do so. So that's a very large advantage to me over what most amp companies offer to do today. The only exception I could say that maybe does it a little easier than that is that I know Mesa Boogie, if you buy their tubes with their amps, the tubes, like I should say the amp will self-bias, which is even more awesome in that way if you're looking for a Mesa Boogie style amp. This amp also is what I would like to call American gain oriented. It's like Marshalls are more British gain oriented, as I describe. Bogner, Diesel are more German gain oriented. This amp is more voiced like a 5150 or an EVH, a Mesa, those types of amps in the higher gain channels. The second channel, not so much, but definitely the third channel is much more in line with those high gain applications or high gain tones that you would get from like a 5150, an EVH, a Soldano, a Mesa, those types of amps. So if that's what you're looking for, this could be a great solution for you. Additionally, as kind of mentioned in the beginning statements, this is very affordable in comparison to most heads of this power range. This amp is roughly $1,800. If you look at most boutique amplifiers that are out there, a lot of the ones that we've demoed already have been $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 amps. You see that a lot out there for price ranges of trying to get those applications or to mimic those similar tone patterns. Even like a Mesa is like $2,500. So for this to get all of those tones out of it for under $2,000 is very appealing in that sense. So let's get into some tones, see what you think about what the amp can do. Oh, before we do, the signal path. So as I've done in my other demos, I want you to understand what the amp sounds like without any effects on board or in the chain. So I am running my guitar straight into the Paul Reed Smith MT100. For the demo today, I'm using a Masterbuilt Strat. This is a Carlos Lopez Masterbuilt Strat with a Radio Shop pit guard in it. These are basically PAF clones that are put into this pit guard with this guitar. So that's the guitar I'm going to be using for the demo. I may use a single coil Strat or Tele as well to showcase the first and second channels, just to give you an idea of what it sounds like and the versatility there. But this is the main guitar I plan to use today for the demo, so no active pickups. And like I said, pretty much vintage voiced PAFs. So if you're looking, or for most applications, I should say most guitar players that are probably looking at this amp may be inclined to use more of a higher output pickup, especially in the bridge position. I know that's what Mark uses in his PRS Tremonti signature guitar that's out there. Those pickups, by the way, as well, are amazing to put in a variety of guitars that need humbuckers. So shout out to PRS and Mark making a great pickup combination for those guitars. But back to the demo itself, I'm using vintage voice pickups in this video, as well as maybe some single coils, just to show you some unique attributes to this amp today. So, and then also it's going into my aux box straight into Luna as my DAW. I am not miking externally as I am in an area where I really can't volume wise. So let's go into some sound clips. that was my demo of channel 1 of the Paul Reed Smith signature amp, the MT100. What I personally enjoy about channel 1 is that it sounds and feels a lot like Fender tones to me. My favorite amps for clean tones are Fender Deluxe Reverbs, primarily the Silver Face Drip Edge Deluxe Reverb. This amp to me sounds like some of those vintage Fenders. So that's why it inspired me to make the demo out of like Jimi Hendrix riffs, some country riffs, because I wanted to show you as the potential user of this amp what it can do clean tone wise. Notice I also used a Strat for this, a single coil Strat, as I mentioned I might do, because I wanted to just show you just how clean it is. My favorite amps, clean wise, typically are a little bit unforgiving when it comes to those clean tones, where you can hear every nuance of the note when you hit the string. And this amp does that in spades for channel 1. So if you add pedals to this, it'd be an amazing platform to add any of your reverbs, your delays, even your overdrives. I will say that this amp does take overdrives differently than any amp I've ever played. It actually brings out tonal characteristics of overdrives, especially if there's any fuzz undertones in the overdrive. It really highlights them more than your typical amplifier does, or I should say other amplifiers do. So be wary of that if you are using an overdrive like a Gritador, was the one that we really heard it through when I was jamming this out with some friends of mine. The Gritador has an undertone of some fuzz to it that you might not be able to hear through like a Marshall or some of those other types of rock forward amplifiers. This amp just brings out tonal characteristics like I've never heard before. So let's go into channel 2. I really think channel 2 is a very unique overdrive channel, and we'll get into that more in a couple seconds here. So that was my demo of channel 2 of the Paul Reed Smith Mark Tremonti signature MT100 amplifier. For this demo, I wanted to showcase the nuances with the second overdrive channel, as it's very Dumble-esque to me, and I know that that is something that Mark had mentioned in his videos, but one of the nicknames I like to give a lot of these tones is like cork sniffer overdrive tones, because for the same type of tone that this amp is putting out by itself, you usually have to buy some very high priced overdrives. Like ones that come to mind are the Vemurium overdrives, Klons, Timmys, those types of overdrives, typically synonymous with more blues type players. So I wanted to showcase a little bit to you as the viewer what you could do with this, which is why I stuck to the single coil Strat for the second overdrive channel as well. This one inspires me to do a lot of like Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff, Pink Floyd stuff. It really reminds me of Joe Bonamassa tones in that as well. So if you're a Joe Bonamassa fan, or some of the more guitar players types of fans like Philip Sayce, or some of those really big kind of blues guys that are playing some of the higher end amplifiers, two rocks with overdrives or amplified Nation, Bludotone, some of those type amps that are some of the Dumble clones. This channel reminds me of those with an overdrive attached to it. So you can still do, you know, the classic rock sounds that you're looking for, but it's really bluesy voice to me is what I'm trying to get at, is more like those modern blues rock guys, or the guys that are inspired by Stevie, inspired by Joe Bonamassa, those types of players. Now again, if you put a fuzz drive in front of this, which I'll do in a future, or I should say a fuzz pedal or a fuzz overdrive in front of this channel, it drastically changes it to the point where if you're using it with your current pedals that you might be using with a different type of amplifier, you might need to rethink some settings with it. It was very interesting for us to see those changes. So now let's move on to channel 3, which is the high gain channel. So that was my demo of channel 3 of the Paul Reed Smith Mark Tremonti signature amplifier, the MT100. This is a very high gain channel. As mentioned at the beginning of the demo, I only have the gain about 3 on this. I'm not using a noise gate at all though, which to me is awesome. I mean, I'm using, you know, dual humbucker Strat with this, just down tuned to drop D, and playing the riffs that I hear on my favorite Tremonti records. The first record, All I Was, which is my favorite Tremonti record, and one that I was fortunate enough to do a sound check demo with him several years ago. So that was fun to relearn some of those riffs again for this. But wanted to show you guys mainly what you could do with channel 3. And you can get his tones pretty easily with channel 3 of this amplifier. Now keep in mind, if you want to get closer, you can add delay, you can add a tube screamer overdrive or like overdrive to it to get a little bit closer to that tone. But straight out of the box, this channel does the Mark thing really well on it. Like I said, it's still defined. You can really hear the nuances of the notes in this one. I know it might appear to have some of that American gain kind of sizzle to it. It does have that a bit, So if you're more of a British high gain fan, like a Marshall gain or some of the Fortin stuff, it might not be for you. But definitely if you're into that 6505 PV, block letter PVs, the EVH amps, Mesa Boogie, this is right up there. And again, the price that you get this for is pretty outstanding in that way. So let's go on to some final thoughts. So some final thoughts on the Paul Reed Smith Mark Tremonti signature amp, the MT100. This is a very versatile amplifier and something I was excited about since I play a very wide range of music. As mentioned in my previous demos, I play a lot of country, classic rock, modern rock, pop, funk, all of these different types of styles of music. So when I saw the demos come out from Mark himself about this amp, I was really excited about it, considering that I could do all of these styles with this one amp. I would say that that's pretty accurate on that. I mean, the clean is very Fenderish, which is great for your country tunes or for your cleans, for your rock, your hard rock, your metal tunes, that a lot of these high gain amplifiers won't give you this type of clean. The second channel, to me, is amazing. I mean, that is what I call like the cork sniffer overdrive, coming into a much more expensive sounding drive from that second channel than what you typically get on channel 2 with many high gain amplifiers. In fact, you don't get that at all from what I've seen outside of this amplifier. Typically, you need to go with a clean platform first, like a 2-rock, some sort of Dumble clone, a Fender of some sort, you know, a Matchless or a Morgan, something like that, that's clean forward, and then use a very expensive overdrive to get in the range of what this is doing on channel 2. And then channel 3 is just crazy for hard rock and metal. Metallica, all the hard rock Tremonti inspired albums, a lot of that 6505 EVH type inspired music. I think a lot of metalcore, a lot of hardcore type players that are out there. Story of the Year, some of the newer bands that I've heard, like Beartooth or Architects, you know, some of those, I think that if you add pedals to them, especially like if you add something that gives you like a sub-octave range, I think this amp would get you closer to that than a Marshall would in that sense. So I know a lot of those players use 6505s or a variant of the EVH family of amplifiers. So for the player, though, that is looking to have as many amps as they can get under one amp, I think that this is a great option for you. Additionally, as mentioned at the beginning, it is super affordable for what you get. It's $1,800, which again is not cheap, right? But if you're playing at the level where you need a 100-watt amplifier or want a 100-watt amplifier to drive a 412 or really give you that amazing amount of push, you know, from an amp, this is a really great one for your arsenal. So love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you like what you're hearing, again, I'm pretty new to this demo thing, but I'm really enjoying it. If you are interested and like what I have to offer here, please subscribe. I'm going to continue to make these as long as people are interested in watching them. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask. This one is my own personal amplifier. So if there's anything else that you'd like to see me do in these videos or do another run through of it, let me know. I'd love to take on that challenge and see what I can do for you. So thank you for watching, and until next time.